What's up? What's happening on a pretty newsy Thursday here on the Hoffman Show? We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And, of course, we are streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. We have a big news day, one that I don't think we really expected, but also one that's not particularly surprising. When your basketball team has won 7 games and it's January 25th, the head coach is always going to be in trouble, even if you knew that basketball team wasn't going to be very good. And ultimately, the Washington Wizards decide this morning, and the timing is funky as all get out, and we'll get to it, but decide this morning that Wes Unseld Jr. is no longer the best man for the role. They move him to a front office advisory role, lots of flexibility. In short, I would say they picked up a contract option on him in October that they probably had to pick up based off a deadline. I don't know that for sure, but that's how those things typically work. They pick up the option. They're going to have to pay him. They like him personally. His insight is valuable. He's not the right man to be in the lead seat right now. And so they move him to this front office advisory role. And really, it's actually fairly simple why. Maybe it's slightly more complex than, hey, dummy, they're 7-36. No kidding, they fired their coach. But there was 2 main things that had to happen this year, and only one of the 2 is happening. And the 2 things were not defined by me or anybody else outside the organization. They were defined by Wes Unseld and, of course, Will Dawkins and Michael Winger. But here was Wes Unseld Jr. on set with me at Wizards Media Day describing exactly what needed to happen for the Zardos in 2024.
Might not translate to wins, but you want teams to walk away from playing the Wizards and know that, we had to play to beat this team. We have to compete at the highest level. You want our guys to enjoy competing, enjoy the connectivity that it takes to be a really good team. Of course, we'll have to find small measures. I think we've measured some things internally, but to see the day-to-day improvement, the week-to-week improvement, the month-to-month improvement individually and collectively, I think we keep stacking those, we'll be heading in the right direction.
The good news for Wes Unseld Jr. was that a lot of individual pieces were developing. Bilal Coulibaly has been a bit of a revelation, and there's a chance that he is extremely good. Like, if Giannis is obviously a pipe dream, but the Giannis-y stuff he does, the way he affects the game on the defensive end as a rookie, the way that he has potential to grow not only bigger and stronger, physicality-wise, muscularly, the way that Giannis went from a beanpole to a brick house. But the fact that he, like Giannis, came here at just 19 years old and theoretically could grow upwards. He could go from 6'9" to 6'10", 6'11", or even a 7-footer. Like, if he does that, then amazing. Can he have the vision and the type of things that Giannis does? Probably not. It's an incredible ask. Giannis is one of one in the history of the league in terms of his exact mix of size, speed, and skill. But could you get something that's a pretty damn good impression out of Coulibaly that maybe is even good enough to be the best player on a championship team? Maybe. More likely he's your second best player when eventually this thing pops off, if it gets there in the way that we all hope that it does. That's great. Denny Avdija having a very, very good year. Kyle Kuzma is more consistent than he was last year, continuing to play the number 1 role, even if he's probably best suited as a 2 or 3 on a true championship team. But he's getting better. And all of that stuff you can't separate from Wes Unseld Jr. and say, hey, whatever he's doing on some level is working in that department. However, the first part of his answer was not daily, monthly, weekly improvement. It was competitiveness. And the Washington Wizards this year have largely been non-competitive. They have at times, and especially the last couple of weeks, their roster's terrible. And we know that. That is not something that is Wes Unseld Jr.'s fault. It's not this bad, though. And so there are times where you just go, hey, you don't have a second big. That's a problem. And since they addressed that with the Marvin Bagley trade, they've been much better. They've been more competitive, but more competitive off of getting blown out by 35 once a week isn't good enough. They're better than that. And while I think a lot of not a lot of, I don't want to put too much on Jordan Poole. I do think that there's a decent amount of success this season that's not happening because they were banking on Jordan Poole refinding a really high level of form that he is nowhere close to approached. Then, and like those people like me, like mea culpa, I've said this when the rare times we've talked about the Wizards over the last couple of months because they've been so non-newsy, let's say. I definitely thought that Poole was capable, and he clearly is not there yet. Hopefully he finds that at some point. He's still young. And I don't say this meanly or whatever. Like everything you still hear out of there is that he works his tail off and he's a great teammate. He just not a very good NBA basketball player at the moment. Certainly not a number one option who I thought could lead the league in scoring because I thought he was going to be unleashed. So certainly that's hurt them a lot. But even with that, like the inability to find a good rotation and to ever seemingly hit the right button late in games. There have been games that they've closed with the starters, games they've closed with the bench, games they've closed with mix of guys, and it always seems no matter what Wes chooses, it's not the right move. And eventually you go, is it because there's not one available, or is it because he doesn't have the pulse of the team? And I do think that you've also started to hear a little bit more grumbling and groaning out of the locker room. And sometimes it's just you need a new voice. And I know there's a lot of new players and all of that stuff, but I think that they have gotten to a point where you have a good locker room, a locker room that's pretty tight actually by all accounts, but one that is not maximizing its current potential, even if you don't really care if you win, and you know you're not going to win in any kind of major way. But what you don't want when you talk about habits and you talk about culture and all of that stuff is anything to fester. And so what you do is go, hey, Wes, this ain't really your fault, but there is a level of accountability and there is a level of whether it's sternness, whether it's being a little bit more willing to try stuff. Like he hasn't really changed his starting lineup all year, and he does have the authority to coach this team, even if a lot of this is coming organizationally. There's been some decisions made that aren't at the coaching level, that are at the Will Dawkins general manager, at the Michael Winger president of basketball operations level. Like there's coaching level stuff that hasn't gone well. And eventually you got to especially when you're in this phase of we got to try stuff. Like we're in the experiment phase. You got to experiment. And whether that's Bilal in the starting lineup, whether that is splitting Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole, and maybe some of that Wes was waiting for the trade deadline and ultimately he's not going to get there. It's just become very clear that as the consistency of competitiveness hasn't grown, the ability to string together multiple wins, the ability to not get blown out by 40 once a week, the ability to stop blowing fourth quarter leads, a game like last night against Minnesota where you're kind of in it the entire time. Like if that was your season, fine, but every time they got within like 6 or 7, Minnesota just stretch it back out to double digits. And the inability to break through now 40 games into this season, 43 games into this season over the halfway point is what ultimately cost Wes Unseld Jr. his job. I will say, Wes is a wonderful person. I have thoroughly enjoyed Wes coming on the show. I hope that there is a way that we can have him in the future. Like other shows have former coaches on, and if the Wizards get good in a couple of years and Wes isn't coaching somewhere else and he's decided to take a different track with his career and he's doing media or whatever, and we can get him on the show regularly to talk about a Wizards team that matters, I would be thrilled with that. I am a big Wes Unseld fan, and I have talked real basketball with him. Like off the record, we're catching up, and we talk, and like that dude can talk ball. He's really smart. But implementing is different. Coaching is different. And that, you talk to NBA people and they'll tell you the 6 inches between the second chair and the head coaching job is the biggest 6 inches in the NBA. And for whatever reason here in Washington, it never caught for him. And today's not a day that, today's a day that both needed to happen, but is not a day of celebration. Wes Unseld Jr. is a good man who lost his job, who deserved, based off merit, to lose his job, but I hate that it didn't work out for him, and that's where we are today. We'll keep diving into the why as well. Ava Wallace has a great beat on it. It is, after all, her beat. 4:30 today, she will join us, and then she'll pop on over into the press room, and you'll probably hear Ava's voice again. because coming up live at 5 o'clock, Michael Winger and Will Dawkins will address the press at Capital One Arena, and we will carry it here live for you, of course, on your home for Wizards basketball, the Team 980. Next, though, your calls, 301-230-0980, your reaction to Wes Unseld Jr. getting fired today, relocated to the front office for the Wizards. Your calls next. The Wizards saw the sign today and said, it's time. Wes Unseld Jr. is out as the head coach. 301-230-0980 is the Ace Law listener line. That is the number you call to get your thoughts in on it. A couple of other things very, very quick. Some of these we'll unpack more in more detail later in the show. The timing of this is weird as hell. Again, it's not surprising that they made the move considering the record and all the other things that we've been talking about. But ultimately, in the middle of a back-to-back, on the same day your owner puts out a letter manifesto about why he's moving the team to Virginia in a couple years and defending that decision and explaining why. I would recommend anyone to read that. Not that it's going to change your mind, just you get a little bit more information from the Leonsis side of it. Now, of course, as I said on Twitter, is it a replacement for Leonsis actually sitting down with a reporter one-on-one? No, there's no replacement for that. And actually like facing the music, but some level of public outreach is better than none. But to do it on the day you fire your coach is freaking weird. And I don't say that like in a damning way. I truly don't understand the decision there. Or maybe there wasn't any thought in it. It was just two separate decisions. So that is weird. But also just purely from a basketball sense, in the middle of a back-to-back is weird. Like you played last night for Wes Unseld, and tonight you're going to play for Brian Keefe. Alrighty then. Last thing real quick before we get to the calls. We got a couple, but we do have some more open lines at 301-230-0980. Another clip from the preseason that I think is important to help shape this conversation. I asked Will Dawkins about success and also about how Wes gets to manage and coach the team in a year where you're not going to be very good. And I thought this answer from Will Dawkins back in October was telling.
How do you work with Wes to create a style? Like when the habits and the identity is being set so much from the top about like this is what we want to be over the long term. Mm-hmm. How do you work with the coach who's managing the day-to-day to make sure that stylistically, one of my favorite Wes phrases is shot diet, like the shot diet, your defensive principles or whatever that you guys feel is appropriate for you to have your hands in. How do you work with that and balance that front office and coaching stuff?
Yeah, when you say at the top, Wes is included in that. Like he is at the top with us. We don't get into style of play and how the team should look and minutes and all that other stuff. Like he's coaching the team. He has full autonomy to coach the team. He's done a tremendous job of adding to his staff this summer. He had some vacancies and filled them with more open-minded guys who are built in, rooted in development, and will push the group towards a style of basketball that we think is more efficient. And also will be more competitive. So we talk every day. We text every day. The big keys that we're going to force and implement and push on our guys will be more about them as professionals. And the day-to-day stuff on the basketball court, he's got that.
That was Will Dawkins. It's funny because even in that answer, like with the benefit of hindsight and kind of just rewatching, re-listening to it, it's like, yeah, like he's got the keys to coach the team. It just, he's going to do what we want. And that's how it should work. Like when you have an idea of how you want to play as a front office and you've been given that power, you better have a coach that's on the same page. And I think Wes was. Again, I don't think Wes is a bad basketball mind, a bad person, even a bad coach. I don't know that he was a good head coach for this team right now. It certainly seemed like there was a disconnect and he just never got the accountability and the types of things that you need to succeed in this league. And whether that was about Wes or about the players, we're going to find out. But Brian Keefe, one of those coaches, by the way, who came in this offseason, spent the last couple of years with the Nets, but has a long history with Dawkins and Winger in Oklahoma City, and by the way, was kind of one of Kevin Durant's guys that helped him in a major way at the start of his career, is now going to get his shot at the head coaching position for the rest of the year. And then the Wizards will embark on a full coaching search this offseason. Let's go to the phones, though. 301-230-0980, the Ace Law listener line. Of course, if you're in a wreck, Ace Law helps you get a check. You call 8888 Ace Law. Let's go to Aries Tony. Tony, what's up, man? Thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, Craig, how you doing, man? You said it. You hit the nail right on the head, right? He was not connecting with the players. I think his substitution was kind of whacked. He would take out a hot player that was, trying to get the team going and everything, and he just didn't substitute right. And then I think The players kind of got tired of that kind of scenario. And two, if they trying to make a move in Virginia and everything, they need to do better than this. And they probably was losing attendance, people coming to see the games because people getting tired of seeing these blowouts and everything. And please, as you can, explain to me, why are they tanking? Because when I'm seeing from college, I don't see nobody that's going to make a major impact to the team like Wembanyama would have made, but nobody. I don't see nobody in college rankings now.
This is not a good year. Last year would have been the year, and unfortunately Ted didn't pull the plug a year early and let Tommy try to make more moves and run it back with KP and Brad and Kuz, and we all know how that went. They also, by the way, it's worth pointing out, Tony, bad luck. They were one ping pong ball of 4 away from Wembanyama. They had going into the final ping pong ball, they had a better chance at Wembanyama than anyone else, and they got unlucky because that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And also, sometimes I guess the answer though to your question is because it wasn't like they could have been good. They were in a bad spot. They're tanking because they had to reboot. And there was no alternative path to trying being good. There was no way for the Washington Wizards to be good in 2023-24 coming out of last season.
Well, I think they could have been way better than what they are now because, again...
Sure, but to what end? Could they have been on a path to a championship, or do they need to fully pull the plug? And I think the answer, if we're being honest, is they needed to fully pull the plug.
You're right. So, do you see anything else? You see anything else happening near the trade deadline that they can make?
For sure. Tony, I got a bunch of other calls, and I'm short on time, but I appreciate you calling and call back anytime. We'll talk about this over the next couple of weeks for sure. Tyus Jones is going to be out of here. DeLon Wright's going to be out of here. If they can get 2 firsts for Kuz, I think they'd probably jump on that. But outside of that, I think they probably wait on Kyle till at least the offseason. And there's other guys as well down the roster. It's don't gear up for an exciting return. The Wizards are going to be involved in a lot of trades. Most of them will be taking on bad contracts so that they can get second-round picks because that's what the early unsexy years of a rebuild look like. And I think it's important to Tony's point, too. I don't know that the guy that's going to change your franchise is going to be in the upcoming draft. It might be 2 years from now. But it doesn't matter how deep a draft is if you get it right. So that's an important thing to remember as well. All right, real quick, let's go to Momo. Momo, what's up, bro? Long time no talk.
So, Craig, real quick, my mother sings. So we watching, you was doing the front office. Welcome to the front office, the Wizards front office. My mother sees you on this program. She says you look like a young Mel Gibson, like the Terror Dome, Mad Max Mel Gibson. But she was very upset with your outfit, with your olive green sweater. She was very upset with that. She said your wife should have dressed you, and you knew you was going to be on TV. And she listened to your show, so don't talk bad about her.
Oh, thanks, Mom. I'm sorry, disappointed. Good thing I'm not wearing that today. I got like a Jordan hoodie on today. That was an old clip, so we're all right.
Yeah, no, she said you looked like you had a Gordon Gartrell on. Lastly, Wes Unseld, do you see Michael Jordan's son playing basketball? No, you do not. You know why? Because he's not good as Michael Jordan. Wes Unseld's a bum. He got hired to be a defense. He is. Listen, he got hired to fix our defense. Is our defense fixed?
No, I'm not trying to tell you he's been good at this, but Wes Unseld Jr., I realize that in D.C. specifically, there is an air of nepotism to it, and we'd also be lying if we didn't think that appealed to Ted Leonsis, because that is the kind of thing that appeals to Ted Leonsis. However, Wes Unseld Jr. was the top assistant on Mike Malone's staff in Denver, and if he had not been hired here, was going to be a head coach somewhere else in the NBA and still might get hired again, because I think people look at Washington in a not dissimilar way that they looked at the football team and go, all right, it didn't work out there, but we like the guy. He's pretty smart. I think we can work with him here. I will not be surprised if Wes Unseld Jr. has another basketball job next season as a top assistant and eventually maybe even gets another head coaching shot.
Of course, because Bernie Bickerstaff and them is still listening. All I'm saying is the guy in OKC is very innovative. The guy in Memphis, very innovative. The guy in Utah, very innovative.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They took over bad rosters and everything. I'm just saying he's a great guy. But when it comes to X's and O's, the basketball execution, which I thought he came here for to improve that, in-game management, plays out of timeout, whatever, putting people in better. He is a bum. He is.
I can't sign off on bum because that is personal shots, and I try not to do that. I will co-sign your theory that it has not worked. That's as much as I'm gonna give you. Okay. Momo, shout out to you. Shout out to your mom. Thank you for calling. Good to hear from you. All right. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for calls right now. Ava Wallace is going to join us next, but we might be able to squeeze one or two more in at the end of the hour, and we're going to take calls throughout the entire show today, interspersed with the live press conference coming up at 5 and the few select guests that we got. But this is basically our show today. We're talking about Wes Unseld getting fired as the head coach of the Wizards here on the show that does more Wizards talk than anyone else, even if that hasn't been a ton lately because they haven't been very good. But today is a day that we will indulge in our basketball fancies. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. Ava Wallace from the Post joins us next. Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Of course, you're home for Wizards basketball. Tonight, 6:45 pregame, 7 o'clock the tip time. But a new head coach. That's the story of the day. And joining us to talk about it is Ava Wallace of the Washington Post. And, you know, Ava, we did our usual game day routine yesterday. We had Dave Johnson on the show. Dave and I are yucking it up. It's a good time, as good as you can have in this kind of season. We're trying our best over here. And all of a sudden, in the middle of a back-to-back, I wake up this morning to Wes Unseld being relocated Like, obviously, there's the record as to why this is happening, but can you give us some kind of greater context of like what it's been like with the Wizards this season and why you think now is the time that Will Dawkins and Michael Winger make this call?
Yeah, I do think the timing is the most interesting part of this. But as for the why, it does, in a way, make a little bit of sense to me because talking to players this season, talking to assistant coaches, kind of everybody around the team, there are, and I know this is unbelievable because of the record and because of especially the way they were just getting absolutely hammered, particularly earlier in the season. And like even in those 2 games in Cleveland to start the year, the Wizards have not been competitive, which is odd because they have kind of been individually doing pretty well. Like you could go down the list, like Kyle Kuzma has been a much more consistent scorer this year. Corey Kispert is doing the right things even if they're not coming up on paper. Deni Avdija is notably better. Bilal Coulibaly is kind of better than expected. So it's kind of like, why isn't this working out on paper? And why can't we kind of put this together as a team? And the players themselves have kind of been wondering that. Just in conversations I've had with them in recent weeks, something that's come up is like a lot of guys saying this is the best locker room they've ever been a part of and something that has the most chemistry. And so a lot of guys then say, you know, you look at teams across the league that have good chemistry and none of them are losing like we are. So something is wrong here. And to me, just looking at it, you know, the eye test, there's definitely a lack of accountability. There's a lack of accountability on defense. There are things like when players do things wrong in the game, they don't get yanked. They just stay on the floor. And some of that is roster construction. You know, Wes Unseld Jr. didn't have an abundance of defenders to work with, for example, but some of it was clearly like, okay, maybe this team needs a new voice or needs a new leader. Again, not saying the lack of competitiveness falls completely on Wes Unseld Jr.'s shoulder, but I do think the Wizards are kind of searching for an answer here.
No, without question. And I went back this morning and listened to my interviews, or at least parts of them, with Wes Unseld and Will Dawkins from the preseason. And there was a couple of clips I was trying to find. And the one that I was really trying to find out from Wes was I remember asking him, like, what's his definition of success? And I'm glad you used the word competitiveness because that's the word he used. And he's like, we have to be getting better and we have to compete. And I think you look at how many times they've been blown out this year and the number of gigantic leads that they have blown. And even if you know you're not going to win a ton of games and all of the structural challenges they face, I did start to wonder about a month ago, like kind of that Toronto game where they blew just I think that's the biggest one they've blown this year, certainly in the shortest amount of time, where I was like, I don't know if he's actually going to last the year. For you, was there any kind of turning point where you went from like, okay, this is part of this very painful and long process to like, there might be a change in this process?
Yeah, it's come very recently, honestly. I'm not going to pretend like there was a big signs that this change was coming. There weren't. I think a lot of people, I think most people were caught off guard, especially just with the timing of this. Like you said, middle of a back-to-back, they kind of almost caught a break with the Bucks firing Adrian Griffin earlier this week. I wonder if some people think that this is a usual thing to fire coaches mid-season that are either in a rebuild season where winning supposedly doesn't matter or have a winning record like Griffin did. It is not. This is weird.
This is weird.
It's just plainly weird timing. But just conversations kind of recently, and like you're in the locker room and you hear something like Kyle Kuzma said the other day where he said, you know, playing hard isn't always the answer. Playing harder isn't always the answer. I feel like we've had good energy. Maybe something else needs to change. So that's only recently. And I didn't follow up and say, are you talking about Wes Unseld Jr.? So that's me kind of interpreting there. But it's only recently that players have started really being like, we actually are improving and we actually are getting better. So you kind of start, you know, going down the list of like, okay, where are the problems here? Obviously, the roster is the biggest one. You need to have players who understand and want to play defense. But, you know, when you have your main player and Kyle Kuzma start talking about, you know, we haven't changed anything all year and maybe it's time to start making some changes, you start thinking like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. That I can see that.
Ava Wallace, Wizards beat reporter for the Washington Post, is with us. So let's unpack that a little bit more because I do think like the last 2 weeks they've been a little bit more competitive. You know, and part of that is like since the trade for Bagley, like part of their fundamental problem with the roster is yes, they have bad defensive players all over the place, but they didn't have a second big. And when Gafford was hurt, or even when he was there, when he went out of the game, like they were screwed. Bagley comes in and you know, some of the insanely bad stretches they would have where they just didn't have an answer go away. And as you said, it did feel like they were improving. So where is the disconnect where there is improvement, but it still feels like the right move when it's like, oh, because you can make an argument based off that, right? That, oh, things are changing. But why is that still then the right move? And kind of that other stuff you're hearing in the locker room where these two seemingly opposite narratives are happening at once?
Yeah, I think that's also a good kind of central question. And the thing that I kind of have landed on it in my mind and just talking to people this morning is that this is kind of the flexibility you're afforded when you're at square -1 of a rebuild. I think you could go two ways with this, honestly, where you say, okay, well, winning and losing weren't supposed to matter, so why all of a sudden do they matter? I don't think it's necessarily the record that has wrangled a lot of people, although that certainly plays a lot into this, definitely. But it's just the fact that, like you said, it's they're not competing. It's not games like last night that got Wes Unseld Jr. relocated, as you said, where they actually do pretty well against the Timberwolves, and it's like, okay, well, you're not going to overcome 21 turnovers. It's the fact that they were just getting blown out, and I don't know if it's necessarily I do think what I went back to is like they don't have their big, strong number one guy. Like Kyle Kuzma is doing his best right now. He doesn't have a ton of help, but these players don't hold themselves or don't account for each other's weaknesses on defense the way that they can show they have on offense. That's something that's missing, where you're going to see individual growth and maybe guys not playing together as a team or understanding how to play team defense, coupled with the fact that like they're in a place in this organization's rebuild where they can say, hey, let's throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And I don't necessarily know if Michael Winger is being that casual about this, but I do think there's kind of that's kind of the methodology of this is working, this is working, this is working. Okay, so what haven't we tried yet? Maybe someone at the top needs to go. I think that's kind of what you're seeing here, and the flexibility they're being afforded in the status they are as an organization right now.
Ava Wallace, Washington Post, is with us. Okay, so a couple of other key things that I want to hit with you, as someone who knows his team inside and out like you do. First thing would be one last kind of roster adjacent thing, which is there's no question the biggest disappointment this year has been Jordan Poole. The hope was he would come here, he would turn around the just horrible year that he had on and off the floor last year in Golden State, gets flushed. He turns back into the guy that helped them win a championship in Golden State 2 years ago. That has obviously not happened. How big of a part of his lack of turnaround do you think leads to this decision today?
I don't know how much there's a one-to-one correlation, just because there are, I would say for certain, if you weren't seeing any growth kind of individually, like if those players I mentioned earlier, the Denny Avdias, the Corey Kispert, Bilal Coulibaly, if they weren't seeing any progress, I think that would be a much easier thing to say of like, look, this isn't working at all and something needs to change. I do think Jordan Poole tends to be something of an anomaly, just because you remember where he came from, where he was raised, designed to do one thing in a system at Golden State, and he is struggling to do anything else in another system that isn't as specifically designed, where his role isn't as specifically defined as it was out there in the Bay. That's something that I don't know if is necessarily as intertwined with the team's issues as the rest of the things we've talked about are today. So yeah, that's what I would say about Poole. But certainly, I think you're right to say that like that is one of the things that has not gone right for the Wizards.
For sure. And like you said, they have done a tremendous job of obviously with Coulibaly and with Denny, and those guys have all made leaps. So it does seem to be a Poole specific thing. And I would say, and the last thing on Jordan real quick is coming into the year, I thought he was one of the most important pieces, because that's a guy that could, if he turns it around, net you 2 first-round picks in return, if not be a part of your future.
Sure.
Do they still see him as that, or is that like, I hate to do this because I don't want to commoditize a player and like do this haphazardly, but in the transactional nature of the NBA, is Jordan Poole essentially a sunk cost at this point for the Wizards, or does he immediately become a huge priority for Brian Keefe as the interim?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to categorize that. I would say the messaging that is coming out of the Wizards organization is that they certainly still believe in Jordan Poole, and they think he can get back to what he was in Golden State, a guy who can be an absolutely nightmare to try to defend and can really disrupt things. He obviously is not a natural born defender and has himself been working on that. So I don't know if they would categorize it as sunk cost. I think one way to measure that is, of course, people on the team, like when I hear something like, oh yeah, the Wizards still love Jordan Poole and people around the organization, everything. I understand that because he's a great guy to talk to. He works really hard.
Yeah.
His teammates seem to really like him. Like he's a part of that locker room in a successful way. You think, okay, do you believe in him? Or is it the fact that, yeah, well, nobody's going to want that contract either and the trade deadline's coming up. So this is kind of what's floating around in the air. So sunk cost, I don't know because it hasn't been that long, honestly. And he's clearly still working it out, coming over and having a big adjustment year. But that's something certainly that I think this new front office will absolutely be measured on, and partly because that was all part of the Bradley Beal, Chris Paul, whatever trade, like they're going to be judged on that, certainly. So I think it's a little bit too soon to give a definitive answer on that. Just, it's only been half a season. So right now, not good. I'd be interested to see if they can get some pieces around him to help him and make it work a little bit more. But yeah, right now, not a good situation.
Yeah, no, that is something that post-trade deadline, I do wonder if he, like right now, the priority is like, we got to keep Tyus out there because he's going to be flipped at the deadline. Let's maximize his value. And it's like, okay, second half of the season, when the guys that are going to get traded are gone, do you build a lineup that is more Poole friendly, if you will? That's something that we'll find out not too long from now. It's only a couple weeks away. Wrapping up with Ava Wallace here on the Hoffman Show, of course, the Wizards beat reporter for the Washington Post. Last thing, kind of with the current team, and then I want to ask you about Wes and kind of where he goes. But Brian Keefe is named the interim. He's got some OKC ties because, of course, he does. What's the Brian Keefe story? And they've already said like we're going to do an extensive search in the offseason, but why is he the right guy right now? And kind of what can you tell us about him?
I think there's a good baseline of trust built up. This was someone who came from the Spurs with Presti to start OKC. He was there in 2007 back when they were still Seattle and kind of was one of the founding members of that organization over there. So Michael Winger first meets him in 2010, I believe, when he starts that job. So there's definitely a level of trust there. The second big part is the second half of this season there's going to be a really big focus on the Wizards' young players. They are not that young in NBA parlance, but pre-25-year-old players, I'll say. And Brian Keefe that's kind of his bread and butter. He worked with KD, James Harden. He worked with Russell Westbrook in OKC and has had a huge effect on those guys' careers, particularly Kevin Durant. He was with Kristaps Porzingis with the Knicks. He was with Shea for the second time around in OKC. Like, that's kind of what he does. He's been working with Koulibaly all season very closely, just with practice at him every day. So I can see if that's the direction they want to take this team for the second half of the season, why Brian Keefe would be the right choice. But they also believe in him as a schematic guy. So it certainly makes sense. And he was brought in just this summer coming over from the Brooklyn Nets, and players seem to like him. So, seems like a natural fit.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And then last but not least, like Wes gets relocated to this front office role. What's that mean, Ava?
Yeah, front office advisory role, very specifically. So that there's a lot of flexibility in that advisory term. That is different from signing on for a role in the front office where you have a title and a contract and a job. That is a very flexible, nebulous thing that I think Winger and Dawkins really genuinely enjoy working with Wes Unseld Jr. It's not hard to see why. He's a lovely person, stand-up guy, and he is just an X's and O's, no pun intended, wizard, but he's a really good basketball mind. So I could see why they would want to keep him around. Also a pretty good time to keep ties with the Unseld family at this moment when Monumental Sports and Entertainment is not super, super high in the court of public opinion. That would be a pretty tough look, I think, right now with the arena move and everything, and some factions of the community mad about that. So I do think it works on both sides. I do not think this means Wes Unseld Jr. will never take a coaching or a head coaching job again. I think, again, the flexibility in that role really allows him to say, yeah, sure, I'll stick around, work in the front office. Maybe I fall in love with it. Maybe I will go take the first head coaching job for whoever calls.
Yeah, no doubt. And they picked up that option, as you reported, back in October. So he's on the payroll, so might as well get something out of sending him a paycheck. Ava Wallace, you can read her coverage of all of that, and you'll hear her asking questions of Michael Winger and Will Dawkins in the press conference coming up at 5 o'clock. Read her work in the Washington Post, WashingtonPost.com/sports. Ava, thank you, as always, on a very busy day for your time.
Thanks so much.
All right, we'll continue talking about all of this next on The Hoffman Show. Team 980. We will have more, of course, at the top of the hour live when when Michael Winger and Will Dawkins address the firing of Wes Unseld Jr., the relocation of Wes Unseld Jr. That is coming up at 5 o'clock. Meanwhile, that's significant. NFL coaching news. This is big, Anthony. I don't even know if you saw this yet.
Breaking news. Oh, snap. News is broken. Breaking news.
Adam Schefter reporting that the Falcons are hiring Raheem Morris as their head coach. So that is huge. That is one of my favorite candidates for sure for Washington if Ben Johnson doesn't get the job. Now, it does seem what's interesting about the timing of this, and obviously we'll get back to Unseld at the top of the hour and Wizards stuff here locally, but one, it looks like Bill Belichick is going to be left out of this cycle. So you have the greatest coach of all time based off resume not having interest anywhere, which is pretty fascinating. Atlanta was the spot for him. I guess Seattle could still get involved there. There are a couple of jobs still open, but Washington is not even interviewing him. And now Atlanta, which is the place where he seemed to be the favorite, is going in a different direction. One, I'm thrilled for Raheem. This dude deserves a job, and he should have probably had one already. The fact that he was a head coach in his early 30s in Tampa, and it went super sideways in ways that were probably not his fault. And he wasn't also ready for the job, but he's in his late 40s now, and he's ready. And I'm super happy that Raheem is getting not just a job, but a good job. And so the NFC South gets its coaches today with Canellis going to Carolina, a move I also like. I just hope that he gets patience that Dave Tepper hasn't shown yet, but a good fit for a quarterback guru to go work with Bryce Young. Raheem Morris gets a very talented roster in Atlanta. They've got to figure out quarterback, but we'll see what they do. But now Washington is staring at Ben Johnson. It seems like a lot of places that may have been interested in Johnson, including Carolina, are like, yeah, he's going to Washington. But Washington now has their pick of Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Mike McDonald, like a bunch of people that, yes, there are some candidates, mainly Morris now, that comes off the board for the Commanders, but they got their picking of top flight candidates. Like, this is an incredible candidate list in the eyes of many, myself included, and the top guy in Washington are just staring at each other, potentially being the last ones at the dance. Now, with that said, as these coaches get hired, it does start to thin out the coordinator pool. So that is something that's going to be interesting to watch is Johnson. Now, he probably gets his OC that he wants with Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach, currently in Detroit. Apparently, he's tied at the hip to Johnson and will come here with Ben Johnson if Johnson's the play here. But when Canellis goes and hires his defensive coordinator, does he wind up hiring someone that Johnson would have liked to hire? These are the kinds of things that you wonder, and we'll see ultimately what happens here in D.C. But we have coaching news of a different kind today. Wes Unseld Jr. out for the Wizards. The men who made that decision, Michael Winger and Will Dawkins, talk about it live next. let's
We
take you
preached
live
patience at
to
the beginning of
Capital
the
One
year.
Arena, where Michael
That was
Winger
a
and Will
function
Dawkins
of
are addressing the media
an
on
eventual
the
return
removal of
to
Wes Unseld Jr. as their head coach.
hyper-competitive basketball. That was really the patience piece. There was no sense of urgency right now. Nothing really occurred. Will and I met with Wes often, and we talk basketball a lot. We talk about the team. We talk about the competitiveness of the team, player accountability, joy, our principles. And it sort of became clearer that there was just this sustained something less than our most competitive selves. And you just kept feeling it and seeing it. And Wes did too. I mean, he saw it, he knew it, he felt it, and he gave it everything he had. The team that he inherited from us this season is significantly different than the teams he had the last couple of years. The job he took 2 years ago is different than the one he had this year. And, I mean, he left it all out there, in my opinion. And the timing, it just didn't register. I don't want to say it didn't register. It was not part of the calculus of where we were in the season, the number of games remaining, back-to-back. It was just, we had a conversation last night, which we do often, and it was just one of those where it's like, man, how are we going to get better? How are we going to sort of ratchet up the dial on competitiveness? And we came to the conclusion that the fellas just need to hear a new voice. And that was irrespective of the timing.
The kind of marching orders you guys both had expressed this season was going to be about really individual improvement and getting better, because you knew that the record was not going to necessarily be a winning record, but you could find value in guys getting better. A lot of guys have gotten better. And so I wonder how you kind of weigh that against the lack of consistent competitiveness that you saw, because individually, player A, player B, player C are getting better, are being more consistent in their output, but it's obviously not leading to wins.
Well, we needed both. We needed the individual improvement, and you're absolutely right. A lot of our players, if not all of our players, have gotten better. All credit goes, well, I don't say all credit, but the credit for that is split among a small group of people, particularly the athletes themselves, Wes, our coaching staff, our player development team, and then Will and the player development group. But yes, our players are individually getting better. It is a team game. And so our basketball team has to get better. They have to play competitive team basketball. To your point about wins and losses, we talk internally a lot about we can tolerate losing a game in which we were competitive for 48 minutes. We can tolerate losing a basketball game where we see the team improving as a collective. In the absence of 48 minutes of competitiveness, in the absence of collective team basketball progress over the course of time, irrespective of the individual improvement, we have an issue to address. And that's sort of how that conversation unfolded.
Yeah. Before I kind of answer that, I think I need to at least address how thankful I am for Wes as well. When it's your first time in this role in a new city, a new environment, and you have someone like Wes and his contributions, you're really grateful for that, and I am. His collaboration is up there with any head coach I've worked with, and I think he takes some great pride in the player development program that you mentioned. When you are at the forefront of what we're trying to do and you build those first bricks and you put those down, and eventually years down the line you see what those become, you take pride in that. And we have a lot of pride in knowing that he's still going to be working with us in the front office, identifying those things and helping us get to where we want to go. But it is a team sport. It's not golf. It's not tennis. It's not become great individuals. And there's things stylistically that we want to see on the court. Specifically, we know our energy wasn't always there. We know our competitiveness was not always there. And defensively, there were nights that were unacceptable. And those are things that we want to continue to work on. And we think that a fresh voice right here, right now is what we need. And also for the betterment of the future. And we're intentional, we're deliberate. These conversations are never easy. No one likes to have them. No one likes to have days like this, but we talked about it and we feel it's what's best for the organization. And the plan is still the plan to move forward with that.
This is for both of you. What is reasonable in terms of the amount and type of improvement you expect from now until the end of the season? What's your reasonable expectation?
Yeah, I think I'll take it back to the first day we got here. We talked about walking in and assessing where we're at. We're going to assess and we're going to evaluate everything we do. And with that, we've set metrics and measures throughout the year. A lot of those things are internal. Some things have been hit, some things have not. Those are going to continue to be those main things and drivers for us. Our players are aware of them. We've met with them. There'll be an influx and accountability and owning that we all are our record right now, and we all need to be better. And I think you'll see that show up in a spirit and in a way you compete that'll handle some of those internal metrics.
Question for Will. Brian Keefe, what does he bring, and what do you hope to see from the team with him in charge?
Yeah, I would say with Brian, it was a natural shift. Wes hired a really good staff, and he hired Brian this summer to be his lead assistant. It's a natural shift to slide over into that chair. Obviously, I was familiar with Brian before I got here, so I know some of his strengths as a player development coach individually. I think he'll be able to kind of tie some of those things you see with the player development, but also enforce those on the court, become a more defensive-minded team. I know he was in charge of the defense at a few different places. So I think you'll see a more defensive mindset. But at the end of the day, it's the strength of our staff. I think Brian will unlock the group that we have around him. Mike Miller will move from behind the bench and fill the spot vacant on the front of the bench for assistant coaches. So I have a lot of years of expertise with Mike Miller, David Vanderpool, Joseph Blair to help support, and guys behind the bench that can rally and pump more juice into the building. And we really challenge them to experiment and try new things. This is a season of discovery for the Wizards right now. We want to try stylistically new things to do defensively, new ways to play offensively. And the goal is you stumble on something that 2, 3, 4 years down the line is changing the way basketball's played. And with that mindset, that optimism, we think we have the experience in the coaching room to make sure we can do that. Thank you, guys.
How long has this decision or this process been stewing?
We talk all the time.
I mean, there's been no stew. We talk to Wes, with the staff, the players, I mean, all the time. It's just, we're a very collaborative group. And I don't mean Will and I as the group. I mean, all of us as the group. And we talk about it a lot. You know, Wes has raised concerns over the last many weeks. We've raised concerns. And those concerns have just, like, they all have the common thread of competitiveness, accountability, and joy. And so, I mean, I can't reflect back on a date when, you know, our conversations shifted from, you know, rotations to competitiveness, or, you know, which hotels are we going to stay in to competitiveness. Like, I don't remember when those conversations shifted, but, you know, we've been addressing the competitiveness piece for a while. And sort of taking it back to Josh's question, you know, what are we looking for the remainder of the season? A lot of it's not measurable. It is hard to measure competitiveness. It is hard to measure watching the fellas play with joy and intent. Those are difficult to measure. There is sort of a like a visceral response to a competitive basketball game and a different visceral response to an uncompetitive basketball game. And I think that it's the fewer of those types of responses we have to an uncompetitive basketball game, that might be a measure. But, I mean, from a timing perspective, we're always evaluating every single facet of the organization that we're responsible for. And so, I mean, day one, I guess, or 2 weeks ago, like, I just don't know the date.
Yeah, I would just say, to follow up on that, everything we've talked about when we talked about coming in and assessing where we're at and evaluating, we're evaluating the process, not necessarily outcomes of how things happen. And when you have those conversations every single day, you can see when they're starting to fray or not necessarily adding up. And our dialogue with our players, our dialogue with our staff, head coach, front office, like it's pretty strong here. And that's the culture that Michael wanted when we got here. And I think when you have honest conversations, you reflect and sit down and you can realize that where's the process going? How do we get it back on track? And we have almost half the season left. I think there's 39 games starting with tonight. That's a lot of time to impact change and give us momentum into the next season. So we don't take that for granted. But we also were intentional and didn't want to rush a decision. We wanted to really give Wes a chance and get to this point, and that's where we're at.
Last question to Josh.
If you're evaluating competitiveness and spirit, how much of the responsibility for that not measuring up so far is on the players? Don't
A lot.
those?
And they know it, Josh. I mean, these are conversations we have with them. They know it. We met with them today. There's not a single player in that locker room happy with this outcome. Every single one of them raised their hand as, when the question was asked, who in this room is responsible for this? Every single player raised their hand. They know it.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
All right, that is Michael Winger and Will Dawkins with a pretty transparent, in my opinion, and pretty straightforward press conference about the failures that lead to them making a change with Wes Unseld, but all those failures certainly not on Wes Unseld. A lot to react to and digest there. We will do that with you next on the phones, 301-230-0980. You just heard the men in charge. I've certainly got some thoughts. So do you. 301-230-0980. Your calls next. What's up? What's happening? It is the Hoffman Show. If you are just joining us, you missed a lot already. The good news is we got a podcast for that. The Hoffman Show podcast will have our full coverage of the big breaking news that Will Dawkins and Michael Winger ultimately decided that Wes Unseld Jr. is no longer the right man to lead the Washington Wizards. That happened, I presume, late night last night. They announced it around 8 a.m. this morning. Kind of rolled over in bed, checked the email, and you're like, whoa, that's not what I expected to wake up to, especially on the night where there's a back-to-back. Wizards have a game tonight. They had one last night, but it just became clear over the last couple of weeks as they had a series of conversations that, as Michael Winger put it, the fellas needed to hear a new voice. Just moments ago, the press conference started with our friend Ava Wallace, who also joined us earlier in the show. If you missed that, very worth your time on the podcast. But Ava asked about the timing of this decision, and since we picked up the press conference live about a minute late just from when we broke and how radio works, wanted to let you hear that answer, as it was one of the most pressing questions that we had going into why now. So many other things at 7:36 are very obvious, but why now? Michael Winger with the answer.
As it relates to the timing piece, the calculus really didn't even include back-to-backs or what game number we were at or anything like that. It was a matter of inputs and outputs for us. We preached patience at the beginning of the year. That was a function of an eventual return to hyper-competitive basketball. That was really the patience piece. There was no sense of urgency right now. Nothing really occurred. Will and I met with Wes often, and we talk basketball a lot. We talk about the team. We talk about the competitiveness of the team, player accountability, joy, our principles. And it sort of became clearer that there was just this sustained something less than our most competitive selves. And you just kept feeling it and seeing it. And Wes did too. I mean, he saw it, he knew it, he felt it, and he gave it everything he had. The team that he inherited from us this season is significantly different than the teams he had the last couple of years. The job he took 2 years ago is different than the one he had this year. And, I mean, he left it all out there, in my opinion. And the timing, it just didn't register. I don't want to say it didn't register. It was not part of the calculus of where we were in the season, the number of games remaining, back-to-back. It was just, we had a conversation last night, which we do often, and it was just one of those where it's like, man, how are we going to get better? How are we going to sort of ratchet up the dial on competitiveness? And we came to the conclusion that the fellas just need to hear a new voice. And that was irrespective of the timing.
I mean, it's a grown-up decision. It's a grown-up way of going about this that I appreciate from Michael Winger and Will Dawkins and Wes Unseld. Wes is no dummy. Let's be very clear about this. Wes Unseld did not do a good enough job to keep his job. He is also absolutely 100% no freaking dummy. He knew this year was going to be tough. I've talked to Wes in the preseason, and I asked him basically, how are you going to do this defensively? And there was a chuckle. He knew that the defensive personnel on this team was not good. He had no rim protector. He had bad people that were in terms of guarding the ball. And if you want two things, it's people who protect the rim and people who are good on the ball. It's literally how the Milwaukee Bucks have been one of the five best defensive teams over the last 5 years, is because Drew Holiday was on the ball and Giannis and Brook Lopez were protecting the rim. It almost didn't matter who anyone else on the team was. Your rotations, whatever, everything becomes easier when you have good on-ball defense and a rim protector. And Daniel Gafford's done okay as a rim protector, but he's more of a shot blocker than a rim protector. He's someone that will make a spectacular singular play, maybe even 2 or 3 times a game, but is not consistently a threat to deter shots at the rim in the way that the other elite rim protectors, a la a Rudy Gobert, is. And in terms of on the ball, Jordan Poole and Tyus Jones are tiny guards. So when you're looking at the on-ball defense, unless DeLon Wright's in the game, you're not doing very well out with your ball pressure, or Koulibaly or some of these other guys that are pretty solid in that department, but you can never get enough guys on the floor at once to tie the string together. And so Wes, and the other thing that I think is a great quote from this press conference is when Will Dawkins said, this is a season of discovery. And the other big complaint about Wes Unseld is he just didn't change stuff up enough. And I don't know whether, like, in the discussions with Dawkins and Winger that were happening constantly, that were referenced frequently in this press conference, that is the brain trust of the team got together, was Wes like, nah, I think we just keep tinkering within what we're doing, or like, hey, this is the way I do it. If you guys want to do something else, like, we're gonna have to go in a different direction. I don't know exactly how that goes down, and maybe that gets reported over the next couple of days, but the way it's presented here by two guys that I think are pretty honest, and I'll get to that in a moment as well, is like it felt like they wanted to start to see some stuff that was different. Wes still thought the way they were going about it was the best way, and eventually it would turn, and that disagreement was starting to cause a little bit of friction, and that friction was not necessarily even between Dawkins, Winger, and Wes, the grown adults, if you will, the older men running the team. It was starting to cause friction in the locker room as well, as you heard in our interview with Ava Wallace earlier, that Kyle Kuzma all of a sudden was like, yeah, sometimes just playing harder isn't the thing. Like, we need to change some stuff up. You wonder if a guy like Bilal is like, what more do you want from me to start, bro? Like, I'm giving you the best defense on the team every single night. Like, I'm playing hard. I'm hitting my threes at a rate that you guys didn't even think was possible until maybe my fourth year in the league, and I'm doing it as a rookie. And like, I should be starting. And plus, like, this, I'm the future of the franchise. Why am I still off the bench? So there's things like that where you wonder if going into the season they had some plans. Wes wasn't adapting fast enough for the players and ultimately for them. And that's why they look at now and go like, all right, we got 39 games left. Let's do some tinkering. And in order to tinker, they needed a different guy to be pulling the strings. And Brian Keefe, who comes from a development background and has been tremendous in Oklahoma City and tremendous in Brooklyn. And, he was in Brooklyn the last couple of years. I'm going to guess, I don't know this for sure, but I'd be pretty surprised considering how good Mikal Bridges is if he wasn't the guy working with Mikal Bridges. He was working with Harden and Durant and Westbrook and all those guys back in the day in OKC. He was with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as he started to just absolutely blossom in Oklahoma City, to the point that, as I say this out loud, the Wizards are going to embark on a head coaching search this offseason. But if some of these guys turn it on in the second half of the season, it seems like one of your top candidates should be right under your nose. We'll see, and I know no one will be happy if they go in-house because it feels like everything in-house with the Wizards stinks and has since 1979. But if this dude's this good as a development coach and he can be your head coach too, that would seem like a pretty valuable guy to keep in your organization. So the other part of this is the players themselves. And I want to get into this more on the phones next at 301-230-0980, what you guys heard from Dawkins and Winger there. I can't think of a time. I won't say I never have heard, because I don't want to be that definitive and declarative and have someone tweet me something in 5 seconds when we go to the commercial break of a time that they remember that I was sitting in the room for, because I've been at a lot of these press conferences. But I cannot immediately recall a time when a coach got fired or there was a significant change and an executive was asked directly, a great question by Josh Robbins of The Athletic, how much of this is on the players? And in a way that assigns blame declaratively, not in a way that like says, oh, we're all responsible, but in a way that directly answers the question. Michael Winger, like a big boy adult that he is, simply goes, a lot. They know it. We talk to them. They don't feel good about this. We ask them, hey, who is responsible? And every single hand went up. And to have him go, and we'll play this clip for you as we're cutting all the audio bites up now. We'll play it for you next as we take some of your calls. For him to go a lot tells you that they also think that this roster is underperforming. And they are hoping this coaching change is a kick in the pants. And while, yes, they know they're not talented by a competitive NBA standard, they should be way, way better than this. And that is a sentiment that I wholeheartedly agree with. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app, and we are taking your calls next. 301-230-0980, our continuing coverage of the big breaking news. The Washington Wizards have fired Wes Unseld Jr. as their head coach, and we're talking about it on your home for Wizards basketball, the Team 980. Your calls at 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Wes Unseld Jr. out as the head coach of the Washington Wizards. We're talking about it with you here on the Hoffman Show, which, of course, not only is live on your radio on the Team 980, but streaming live on the free Odyssey app. And the podcast is always available at the end of every hour. Then at the end of the full show, we podcast that as well. You can listen to it in your car, Bluetooth style, Apple CarPlay, whatever it is, however you listen to your, whatever it is you listen to in the car, other podcasts. We'll pretend like you don't have those. We're clearly your favorite, the only thing you listen to. Your favorite music, all that. Hoffman Show podcast and all of our shows here at the Team 980 available to you on demand on your time, and also with your smart speaker at home. Just ask Alexa or Siri or whatever smart speaker you have to play the Team 980. We are streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. All those places you can find our interview with Ava Wallace from earlier in the show, and of course the full press conference between Michael Winger and Will Dawkins, who just spoke at Capital One Arena. Interim coach Brian Keefe just spoke as well, and of course he'll speak to Dave Johnson, who will join us because it is a Wizards game day after all, coming up at 6:15. But I thought a couple more interesting things as we wait on some more calls. Again, 301-230-0980 is the number. A couple of things that were interesting about this press conference from Winger and Dawkins, starting off on kind of how long this has been stewing. Like, how long have they been thinking about this, Michael Winger, on that decision?
We talk all the time. I mean, there's been no stew. We talk to Wes, with the staff, the players, I mean, all the time. It's just, we're a very collaborative group. And I don't mean Will and I as the group. I mean, all of us as the group. And we talk about it a lot. Wes has raised concerns over the last many weeks. We've raised concerns. And those concerns have just, like, they all have the common thread of competitiveness, accountability, and joy. And so, I mean, I can't reflect back on a date when, our conversations shifted from, rotations to competitiveness, or, which hotels are we going to stay in to competitiveness. Like, I don't remember when those conversations shifted, but, we've been addressing the competitiveness piece for a while. And sort of taking it back to Josh's question, what are we looking for the remainder of the season? A lot of it's not measurable. It is hard to measure competitiveness. It is hard to measure watching the fellas play with joy and intent. Those are difficult to measure. There is sort of a visceral response to a competitive basketball game, and a different visceral response to an uncompetitive basketball game. And I think that it's the fewer of those types of responses we have to an uncompetitive basketball game, that might be a measure. But, I mean, from a timing perspective, we're always evaluating every single facet of the organization that we're responsible for. And so, I mean, day one, I guess, or 2 weeks ago, like, I just don't know the date.
So that, I think that characterization of the conversation is super interesting, and it goes back to, I'll play this. I played it earlier in the show, but really, I mean, Wes Unseld Jr. laid this out in the preseason when he was with us. He talked about what needs to happen this year to be successful for the Washington Wizards, and there were two categories that he touched on, and one was improvement, but the other was that word that Michael Winger kept bringing up. It was competitiveness. Here is that from our chat in the preseason.
And that might not translate to wins, but you want teams to walk away from playing the Wizards and know that, we had to play to beat this team. We have to compete at the highest level. You want our guys to enjoy competing, enjoy the connectivity that it takes to be a really good team. Of course, we'll have to find small measures. I think we've measured some things internally, but to see the day-to-day improvement, the week-to-week improvement, the month-to-month improvement individually and collectively, I think we keep stacking those, we'll be heading in the right direction.
And unfortunately, they didn't. It never changed. There were things that changed this year. The Wizards lead the NBA in pace. That is a huge deal that they finally started playing like grown-up 2023 NBA, 2024 NBA basketball, as opposed to being this plotting slow team that took a bunch of mid-range jumpers. Wes loved the phrase I shouldn't say Wes loves it. Wes used the phrase, I loved it, shot diet. Their shot diet was a lot better this year. But ultimately, it comes down to a competitiveness. And I think that when you look at, when you stop talking about rotations and kind of the plannedness, and I think what it comes down to is the ability to react to within a game, to understand who's got it going on any given night, to understand, hey, this dude's dogging it on defense, and we're trying to build habits. We're trying to build culture. You can't let that slide. I know we're trying to get that guy minutes, or maybe we talked about thing X, but, you know, it's the ability to prioritize, and it's hard. This is really hard because when you're in a game, you're thinking about a million different things, and it's hard to have this long view when you're just trying to get to the next timeout and the next quarter break and the next half and, you know, win the game on any given night. But you had to approach this season in a way that prioritized certain things that maybe you would otherwise tolerate as a head coach, like bad habits, bad defense, not giving required effort when you're a star player, that you kind of let slide in the NBA sometimes because it's worth it in the end. Your stars are managing themselves to be the best down the stretch, and it's still worth having them on the floor. But when you don't really have a guy and you are managing the habits of what you're trying to build and the culture that you're trying to establish, you got to have a quicker trigger sometimes. And I think the other thing too with along those lines was the lack of consistency with that. There were times that guys were on the bench for a long time, and it never really felt like it had a rhyme or reason. There wasn't like a, hey, that dude got benched, or a, hey, that dude is performing poorly, so he is or isn't going to get benched. Sometimes it was, that guy's going to play through it. Sometimes it's like, nope, he's done for the night. And I think that is a really, not only is it bad because it doesn't really give players clear incentives and a clear like understanding of what's going to happen, and both in the short and long term, but it becomes a frayed environment where the stress levels are higher than they need to be for reasons that are completely within a control. And that's not a way you incubate talent. You don't want people walking on eggshells. And it's not, you know, people aren't walking on eggshells because Wes is a bad dude and he's mean to people and he's yelling at everybody. They walk on eggshells because they literally have no consistent expectations. If you want to develop people, and this is something that's going to become really important for the Commanders as well, if you want to develop people, you have to give them clear expectations. You have to give them clear standards. And the front office does an excellent job of this with the advanced metrics and the analytics and the things that they provide, the under the hood metrics behind the scenes. But ultimately, the main currency in the NBA is minutes. And if you just don't know if your performance is going to lead to you getting to play or not, and when you're going to play and who you're going to be playing with, it's really hard to be consistent. And it's not an optimal way to develop talent. And in a year that's about developing talent, why would you operate that way? And I think that's a longer, slightly more in-depth version of the actual pretty in-depth and honest answers that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins gave at that press conference at the top of the hour. We'll let you hear a little bit more of it coming up at 6 o'clock. Next, though, we'll take our one NFL dip of the day. Typically in this half-hour block on Thursdays, Anthony and I have done our NFL tiers. We'll wrap up our tiers for the season next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Coming up at the top of the hour, we'll get back to the Wizards news of the day, kind of recap the story as it sits. And that is with Brian Keefe taking over for Wes Unseld Jr. as the head coach for now. Dave Johnson is talking to Brian momentarily, and you'll obviously hear that on the pregame show, but you'll hear from Dave at 6:15 as you do each and every Wizards game day. All right, now, though, our one NFL turn of the day, Anthony. We got our NFL tiers, final edition of the season. Couldn't let the show go without recapping how we did this year, ranking our NFL teams. And this is something we've done now each year, and that we've had the show all 2 football seasons, and we'll continue to do as long as we have it, because I think this is the right way to go about it. I think the right way to try to rank teams is not power rankings. Power rankings are silly. They move too much. I want to be able to categorize teams realistically with who they are, who else is kind of close to them, and then where's the line. And I think we did a pretty good job overall this year. Obviously, San Francisco and Baltimore were pretty easy to keep in the prime contenders category. And then the Lions and the I feel like I wanted the Lions up more of the year, and you pulled them back down. Looks like they were for real. And then the Chiefs, we had them in prime contenders most of the year, even when at times it looked like they didn't belong. I think we, on that front, did pretty well.
I mean, I think the reasoning behind us not, really having the Lions all the way up there was fair. We look at the Dolphins. It was true. They hadn't beaten anybody all season long. What did they do? They didn't do anything the first round. Well, they got knocked out the first round. You look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, who actually didn't even end up making the playoffs because guess what? They hadn't beaten anybody for real. The defense was a little streaky. But I think the Lions just might be the outlier here in terms of going out and, just not being able to beat the Ravens or, any of the other good teams that they faced.
Yeah, I
made to learn from it.
Yeah, I also wonder in hindsight, though, did we underestimate some of the teams that they did beat? Like they beat the Vikings twice early.
Mm-hmm.
The Vikings were a lot better than we thought. The Saints, okay, whatever. They split with the Bears. The Bears loss definitely threw people for a loop because it was early, but like the Bears actually wound up being a lot better than people realize.
Yeah, but their defense came on strong late.
It did, but like they still like my point is like once the season plays out, like they beat the Bucks, they beat the Packers. Like these are playoff teams. They beat the Chiefs to open the season. And sorry, the Bears games were late. Like the Bears had already kind of turned it on at that point.
Okay.
So I mean, realistically, like this was their season. They beat the Chiefs in the season opener.
Yep.
They lose to the Seahawks in a tight one. They then beat the Falcons, beat the Packers, beat the Panthers. They smash the Bucks. Then they get trounced by the Ravens, and everyone's like, "Oh no, the Ravens killed them. They're not for real." They beat the Raiders. They beat the Chargers in a game that was probably a little closer than it should have been. But then they beat the Bears, and then they lose 2 of 3. They lose to the Packers, beat the Saints, lose to the Bears. And people are like, ah! And what do? They destroyed the Broncos.
Yep.
They beat the Vikings. They lose on the stupid 2-point debacle by the refs to the Cowboys.
Yeah.
And then they beat the Vikings again. And then they've obviously won 2 playoff games.
Yeah, I guess the loss to the Packers isn't as bad. It is a divisional game.
It's a divisional game. They lost by 7.
Yeah. So I guess that's more so on us because we overlooked the Packers. We overlooked the Bucks.
Right. And I think that's sometimes
so, though.
Sometimes that's what happens is you don't realize until it's too late that a team that you thought wasn't that impressive of a win actually is. And, it's one thing if, like the Commanders beating the Broncos in the beginning of the year is different than a team beating the Broncos in the middle of the year when the Broncos were like really playing well, right? It's not like all of a sudden it's like, oh, that was actually a great win for Washington in week 2. No, the Broncos were at that time a team that was ready to give up 70 points to the Dolphins the next week. But like when some of the Packers stuff happens, they lose to the Packers in week like 14 or so. Let's see, 18, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. Yeah, more like week 12, week 13, somewhere in there. I don't know where their bye week was. Point is, like, the Packers at that point had started their comeback. Like, the Packers were on one at that point. And the Bears were, like, really hot at that point. They're saving Flus's job.
Mm-hmm.
And so they lost 2 divisional games, one of which was pretty bad. That Bears loss was bad. It was 28-13. But I think that the Lions, like, they were 12-5 on the year. They were a 12-win football team.
Yeah.
Washington hasn't done that since 1991. They were legitimately really good. And I think, obviously, when you get down to this, and these are the 4 teams left, you feel pretty good about it. There is, like, you're going to have some teams that you had in the prime contenders category, for instance. Like, we really goofed on Dallas. Whoops. But it's the playoffs. Like, eventually there's 4 teams left, and if you have 4 teams in the other in more than 4 teams in your top category, you're going to have some misses. But it is like the Lions are the party crashers, and everyone else I think we kind of anticipated being here. Maybe Baltimore a little bit less so than the other 2, but they are who we thought they were.
Yeah, I think everybody's been beating the 49ers drum. The Chiefs, they got Mahomes, so we never really could write him or them off. But yeah, I mean Lamar, he's a finalist for the MVP this year. I called it.
You did? Do we have our preseason predictions?
Yeah, I have them up.
We should go through those. What? Maybe Super Bowl week?
They go right here.
Who did I have as MVP?
Oh no, that's.
Oh boy, Anthony's lost.
Yeah, I gotta find it. I know it's in here.
It's
though.
just over here.
Got a
somewhere.
lot of sticky notes.
It's just that I don't what? How many? You really got sticky notes?
Yeah. I got a lot of them.
You can't control F a sticky note.
No, I can't find the MVP one. But I know Lamar was my MVP guy.
Yeah, no, I remember you saying that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
what's on the sticky notes that you did find?
So we got our predictions. We got AFC East, Bills, Jets. Wow.
You had the Jets or I had the Jets?
You had the Jets. I had the Bills.
Damn, that really died quick.
Yeah. I had the Ravens. You had the Bengals in the AFC North. I had the Jags. Well, we both had the Jags.
Whoops.
AFC West, we had the Chiefs.
Okay.
NFC North, I had the Lions. You had the Vikings.
Damn.
NFC South, I had the Falcons. You had the Saints.
Oh.
We both had the Niners coming out of the NFC West, and we both had the Eagles repeating in the NFC East, and that didn't age well. We should have known.
Thanks for the Wests. It wasn't for the West, I wouldn't have gotten anything right. And I still might get the Super Bowl champion right.
Yeah, you still might.
Which is really all I care about.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. That's the NFL tiers. When we get back, more on Wes Unseld Jr. Being removed as the head coach of the Washington Wizards, including more of your calls, 301-230-0980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Coming up in about 10 minutes, we have Dave Johnson joining us from the arena. Obviously, we will talk about the Wizards coaching change with him. He will have talked to Brian Keefe, the new Wizards interim coach, at that point as well. So excited for that at the top of the hour. Or sorry, not the top of the hour. In about 10 minutes from now, we're at the top of the hour. So we'll talk to Dave and obviously get back on the floor as well for the Wizards on a pretty significant day. The day they ultimately decide to move on from Wes Unseld Jr. as their head coach. One thing that's worth noting that wasn't in the part of the press conference we were able to air for you live, but it was addressed what Wes Unseld's role will be, and it essentially will be whatever Wes wants it to be. They'll have those discussions over the next couple of days. They have to pay Unseld, so they probably will be like, dude, we value your opinion. We really like you personally. You've been a part of these conversations that all led us to the point that we said this wasn't the right role for you moving forward. So we still want to be able to pick your brain. But I also think there is a reality that perhaps they just part ways. And maybe he's around the rest of the year and they give him a call every once in a while. And he largely just gets to collect his check and sit at home and wait for next season when he'll be a very coveted assistant around the league. But there is like, if you were the head coach and now you're advising, like, what are you advising on? Maybe it's player personnel stuff. Who knows? So we'll see ultimately what that looks like for Wes Unseld. But the reason that Wes Unseld Jr. is no longer the head coach was because the Washington Wizards were not a competitive basketball team. And this goes far beyond, but is reflected in the 7-36 record that they have and the 77-130 record that he had as head coach. Ava Wallace joined us earlier in the program, and you know, this was before Winger and Dawkins spoke at 5 p.m., but she hinted at exactly why Wes Unseld was likely being removed, and something that we'd hear confirmed from the horse's mouth, if you will, or the horse's mouths a short while later. But here was Ava.
Yeah, I think that's also a good kind of central question. And the thing that I kind of have landed on it in my mind and just talking to people this morning is that this is kind of the flexibility you're afforded when you're at square negative one of a rebuild. I think you could go two ways with this, honestly, where you say, okay, well, winning and losing weren't supposed to matter, so why all of a sudden do they matter? I don't think it's necessarily the record that has rankled a lot of people, although that certainly plays a lot into this, definitely. But it's just the fact that, like you said, it's they're not competing. It's not games like last night that got Wes Unseld Jr. relocated, as you said, where they actually do pretty well against the Timberwolves, and it's like, okay, well, you're not going to overcome 21 turnovers. It's the fact that they were just getting blown out, and I don't know if it's necessarily. I do think what I went back to is like they don't have their big, strong number one guy. Like Kyle Kuzma is doing his best right now. He doesn't have a ton of help, but these players don't hold themselves or don't account for each other's weaknesses on defense the way that they can show they have on offense. That's something that's missing, where you're going to see individual growth and maybe guys not playing together as a team or understanding how to play team defense, coupled with the fact that like they're in a place in this organization's rebuild where they can say, hey, let's throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And I don't necessarily know if Michael Winger is being that casual about this, but I do think there's kind of that's kind of the methodology of this is working, this is working, this is working. Okay, so what haven't we tried yet? Maybe someone at the top needs to go. I think that's kind of what you're seeing here, and the flexibility they're being afforded in the status they are as an organization right now.
Ava Wallace from the Washington Post with us earlier. And then, you know, when you get into the press conference, you start to hear directly from Michael Winger and Will Dawkins. I thought this answer from Will Dawkins was pretty telling on kind of that end part of Ava's answer, like the competitiveness, the amount of times they've just been blown out, was obviously a huge reason why they decided to make this move from Wes Unseld. But Michael Winger talked about how they need to try some different stuff. And he doesn't use the word stale, but it felt like things had staled in a way that was no longer a part of the mission 43 games into that year one, or as Ava put it, year -1 of this rebuild.
We've talked about when we talked about coming in and assessing where we're at and evaluating, we're evaluating the process, not necessarily outcomes of how things happen. And when you have those conversations every single day, you can see when they're starting to fray or not necessarily adding up. And our dialogue with our players, our dialogue with our staff, head coach, front office, like it's pretty strong here. And that's the culture that Michael wanted when we got here. And I think when you have honest conversations, you reflect and sit down and you can realize that where's the process going? How do we get it back on track? And we have almost half the season left. I think there's 39 games starting with tonight. That's a lot of time to impact change and give us momentum into the next season. So we don't take that for granted. But we also were intentional and didn't want to rush a decision. We wanted to really give Wes a chance and get to this point, and that's where we're at.
That, I think, is great phrasing. And there's another phrase that Dawkins used in another answer that I thought was the quote of the presser, which is, this is a season of discovery. This is a season where they want to try and tinker with things. And, you know, it got to a point where they want to try different schemes defensively, because obviously what they're doing defensively is, the word unacceptable was used. Like, there was the level of brutal honesty in this press conference that I really appreciated. And we'll wrap up with that when it comes to the players in just a moment. But the phrase season of discovery, and then hearing the phrase like unacceptable defense on certain nights, tells you like, nah, like we can't, we're willing to deal with a lot, but not this. And so whether it's the rotations, whether it is a wanting to try some different things, different lineup combinations, different players starting, not starting, playing big minutes, closing games, different guys in different roles. Like, do you want Koulibaly on the ball more? Like, there's all these different things that you both want to tinker with, but also you need to, as Dawkins said at the end there, you don't want to rush. You want to give any new tweak that you make a chance to succeed. You can't be so all over the map that nothing has a chance to work through some initial growing pains and problems and ultimately implement itself as a good part of what you keep moving forward. But you do, in a mode that they're in right now, you do need to be willing to fail fast and understand what is just a sunk cost and not worth it. And it seems like these guys have a really good feel for that. And last but not least, this question by Josh Robbins led to one of the most honest and I think refreshing answers I have heard from a front office executive in a long, long time.
If you're evaluating competitiveness and spirit, how much of the responsibility for that not measuring up so far is on the players? Don't
A lot. And they know it, Josh. I mean, these are conversations we have with them. They know it. We met with them today. There's not a single player in that locker room happy with this outcome. Every single one of them raised their hand as, you know, when the question was asked, who in this room is responsible for this? Every single player raised their hand. They know it.
That had big dad energy. Big disappointed dad energy. Big like, oh, they messed up and they know it. I don't need to punish them. They put themselves in timeout. That's the kind of team you want. Apparently, it's a great locker room. You just hear on the record, off the record, that locker room is tight, it's good, it's healthy, but you got to keep it that way. And it's got to mesh with the coach. And even if they like the coach personally, I mean, this was the Commanders' issue in a lot of ways. It was 53 deep. Did they love Rivera? No. Was there a lot of dudes were pretty vocal about how much they liked Rivera? Yeah. But they didn't play hard enough for him, and there wasn't an accountability. And so ultimately, these two men, just, you know, for some different reasons, some similar reasons, suffer the same fate. And that is another coaching change in Washington. Wes Unseld out today. Where do they go from here? That is going to be a lot of our conversation with Dave Johnson next. He's had a chance to talk to new interim coach Brian Keefe. You'll hear that interview on the pregame show here on the Team 980. But Dave joins us from the broadcast booth at Capital One Arena next. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Real things, real people said in real microphones coming to close the show. But it is a Wizards game day. And, yesterday we had Dave Johnson on and we were just yucking it up and thinking, we're all good for tomorrow. And now today is a very different day. But we still are going to get the radio party started.
Time to get the radio party started.
Blocked by Bilal Coulibaly. Oh boy, did he stuff him. Left wing Poole, it's there. Oh, that's a Poole party. Near the basket, slam right there. Under the steal and the slam. You better go off. Intercepted by Kispert. Kispert now foul line. Oh, slam. Ooh, that'll dry your preserves.
It's time for Dave Johnson on a Wizards game day.
Kuzma for three. Oh, it's there. It's there. Big shot.
On the Hoffman Show.
Dave in his usual spot in the broadcast booth at Capital One Arena. Dave, you're in your usual spot, but there are changes afoot. We wake up to the news this morning that Wes is going to move into this front office advisory role. Brian Keefe is taking over. And we haven't really talked about Keefe at all today, so I actually want to start there with you. I promise we will circle back around to Wes, someone you've spent a lot of time with over the last 3 years. But theoretically, you would have just talked to him because you have your pregame interview that's going to be airing here in 30 minutes during the pregame show. So what's your first impression of Brian Keefe?
Well, and actually, I've not had a lot of interaction with him. I've had some, but not like Wes Unseld. And actually, Wes Unseld, I've known Wes Unseld for 28 years.
Probably since he was a child.
Since he was a kid. So,
yeah.
It's a tough day for me because personally, yes, I did want it to work out for him as a head coach, and we'll explain. Part of that dynamic, but Brian Keefe is someone that's appreciative that Wes Unseld is the one who hired him this summer to be the lead assistant, and he's appreciative of how Wes, welcomed him to the staff and all he did for him. He's someone that I guess Kevin Durant earlier today was raving about him as a coach. He certainly has a lot of experience. Look, what jumps off your page right away is that he started in the San Antonio Spurs organization when they won a title back in 2007. So I think there's something to developing as a coach in the Spurs organization. His whole focus is going to be on this team being a better defensive team as a team, and that's how we've reached this point. We've had many discussions where we would break down individual players. And there's improvement. I mean, Denny Avdia is coming off a season high 25 last night, or 24 rather. You can go right down the list of guys that are improving and are trending in the right direction. But as a team, it's been a lack of competitiveness, quite frankly, and that's a word that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins use. And I know you just played some cuts from the press conference they had. When I say cuts, sound bites, whatever the term is, whatever the hip kids are saying now, that mention that. And I think, a couple takeaways for me was that Wes Unseld, it is a serious situation where they're going to he will be still involved in the organization because this has been a very collaborative process. They didn't expect to be 7-36, but they also didn't expect to be 36-7 or whatever we are. So in other words, this is not a firing because the record, the second half, I don't know, how it's going to go. But they clearly were seeing something that didn't pass the eye test. And you played, and to me, this is the quote that says it all, that Michael Winger asked, who in this room feels responsible for this, talking about the change in coaches, and they all raised their hand. And I think to our listeners out there, as we all think about our jobs, and I had an earlier conversation today as I was giving a speech somewhere, and they were talking about how, if you ask everyone in a room, well, are you a hard worker? Well, everyone's going to raise their hands, but they might think they're a hard worker. They might pass the lie detectors test that they're a hard worker, but are they really working hard enough? And so that's why coaching changes happen. This was something also, I think it was telltale that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins described this, that Wes, he could see it. So it's not that simple also you say, all right, they're not competitive enough, or they need the but you don't just yell at them more. So it's not. If it was that simple, we could all be coaches. And you know what? It also kind of reminds me a little bit of when the Capitals fired Glenn Hanlon on Thanksgiving Eve, and George McPhee told me this story that Glenn Hanlon had come to him several times leading up to this game, saying, George, I really feel like I'm not reaching the locker room. I'm not connecting. I'm not saying Wes, this is the same thing, but what I'm saying is coaches do sense. They know when it's just not happening.
Wes is a smart guy.
Right. He's not, he went to Johns Hopkins University, and that's, not Towson State where I went, which, by the way, you can still get a good education. But the point being is George McPhee said, well, let's give it, we had a homestand coming up. Well, that game, Thanksgiving Eve, they lost to, at the time, the Atlanta Thrashers 5-1. And the next morning, Thanksgiving morning, Glenn Hanlon walked in to the office and basically knew, and George McPhee, they almost didn't even have to say anything. Now, this was, I think, a different situation, but I'm just pointing that out that it's something that Wes could sense, and he wants this team. He wants this franchise, certainly to reach its goals, and he wanted to reach the goal as the head coach. He still will be a part of the franchise, but now Brian Keefe gets a chance to audition for the role of head coach. But again, they pointed out that the offseason search will be a comprehensive one, which Keefe will be a candidate, but doesn't mean he has a leg up just because he coached this team right now.
Yeah, his resume is very impressive in the stretches of success, and especially the stretches of developmental success that he's had and been a part of as an assistant. I immediately was like, well, shoot, if this is his resume, I'd imagine he winds up being one of the top candidates in a comprehensive search, so we'll see how the rest of the season goes. But as you mentioned, Dave, you've known Wes Unseld for almost 30 years at this point. So it's a tough day, and I reflected earlier on how much I like Wes as a person, but also the results are what they are. We understand it. We see the competitive stuff, but do you have a favorite when someone comes to you and is like, "Hey, tell me about Wes Unseld Jr." What's a story that immediately pops to mind that explains to people that and look, on a day like today, I understand there's a pocket of fans that just want to be like, yeah, he sucked and he got fired. That's what you get in sports. Right. I get it. You people can pipe down. This is a human being who I think served this franchise well, so I would like to get a good Wes Unseld story out of you, because I don't know how many more times we'll be able to do that.
Well, and you're right. There really shouldn't be. You understand the fans' frustrations when they're not losing. Well, I almost wish we'd say, let's change coaches, not fire coaches, because they really are. Look, they're human beings, and it doesn't matter. You can't say, well, they make a lot of money, and they'll be fine. But you know what? It's still their chosen profession or their chosen passion. We just had it with the football team. I mean, I don't know if anybody thinks Ron Rivera's a bad guy. And by the way, he's had success before. It didn't work out for whatever reason in Washington. But to your point, why I'm, saddened partially by this, I understand the decision, but what I'm saying is saddened that it didn't work out, because this was not because his name is Wes Unseld. He gets the job 3 years into his coaching. He paid dues like you would not believe. And this goes back when I was doing morning radio on the road at the same time I was doing Wizards, and I'd be up at 4 a.m. and this is in the hotel rooms, and this is back when you had to, go down and get a copy or whatever. And guess who else was up at 4 a.m. working hard on scouting reports? And so that's not a funny story about Wes Unseld, but it shows to who he is. He worked his tail off to get finally a head coaching position, including, obviously coming from Denver, where they had great success. So that's the part that I think people need to know, that, he did not get anywhere because his name is Wes Unseld. In fact, I remember, the Wes Unseld Sr. saying, all right, well, I'll give him a chance in this basketball thing, but he's going to have the worst boss ever, me. And you can only imagine that, that he was never going to give Wes Unseld Jr. breaks. And people say, well, he was supposed to be this great defensive coach, and not. The problem is you still need players. And players to buy in. You can have. This is a league. The league is too good. There is not a scheme developed to stop Nikola Jokic, or it's not a scheme. It's more involved in that, and that's where it gets back to where we started this conversation about competitiveness, and that is a mindset, and that is hard. And that's what Brian Keefe talked about, and we'll talk about. You're here in our pregame show that he wants to get this mindset right over the next 39 games.
No doubt about it. Very excited to listen to the pregame tonight on my ride back home to hear from Brian Keefe. He sounds incredibly impressive from everything I can read about him. Obviously, didn't want to see this day come, but I think we all understand it, and we look forward to better days ahead for the Wizards. As you always say, Dave, there is no script, so who knows what the final 39 games have in store. It starts tonight with Utah. Glenn and Dave on the call. 6:45 here on the Team 980 for the pregame 7 o'clock tip. Dave, have a great call, and we will talk to you next week.
And, I've been doing this 27, 28 years. But what actually makes me feel like a big deal?
What's
here
that?
At Capital One Arena? When I walk in the afternoon, my man Kevin Jones, and today he had his friend Jimmy, they are the hugest fans of the Hoffman Show.
Oh.
And the first thing they said to me, they said, hey, I heard you got a hat for Craig Hoffman. So, people are listening closely. So, but the point is, they're just great, and they're listening right now. So that's my cheap excuse to give a shout out. But they're
shout
great
out
fans
to them, for sure.
of the
Appreciate
Hoffman
you
Show, and they reminded me that I got to get you a hat.
So I guess that does beg the question, because I saw a couple people tweeting that the hat that the Wizards gave away last night, the Denny Advia designed hat, is the best giveaway the Wizards have done in years. Did you actually get me one, Dave?
Well, no, and see, that's where your man Kevin Jones, and I will get you one.
Okay.
Trust me, I've got connections.
I have faith in you.
But when Kevin Jones and Jimmy said, get them a hat today, I thought, all right, I better live up to it.
All right, well, I have faith in you. I have less faith in me to remember. I will at some point show up to do a broadcast with you, and you'll be like, hey, here's your hat. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Thanks, Dave.
No.
So we'll get that all sorted out.
Kevin and Jimmy were all over me today.
Thank you, Kevin and Jimmy, for remembering things that I cannot.
Right.
We appreciate it. All right, Dave, have a great call tonight. Thank you.
Listen, as always, you listen in the afternoons. You guys do a great job, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you, as always. Dave Johnson, everybody, the legendary voice of the Wizards, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Our pleasure to have him each and every Wizards game day. When we get back, though, we wrap up the show. Final thoughts on the big news story of the day, and real things, real people said into real microphones. It's the Hoffman Show wrapping up here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. Great show today, talking about obviously Wes Unseld Jr. getting removed as the head coach of the Washington Wizards. I mean, I said this to start the show. Today, this sucks. Wes Unseld Jr. is a good dude. He's a good coach, and it didn't work out. And you want, when good people come to your franchise, you want it to work out because you don't want to squander those opportunities. And I know that there is an air of nepotism that inherently is going to leave people thinking that the reason Wes Unseld Jr. got his job is because his dad is Wes Unseld Sr., who was arguably the best player in the history of the franchise. But realistically, Wes Unseld Jr. was an assistant coach in the NBA for a long time. When Dave Johnson talks about the fact that this dude had to pay his dues, sure, were there doors open because of his name? Yeah. Do you have a natural network because of your name? Sure. But, it wasn't like he was gifted a job in the way that some people are with nepotism. He was decades of assistant level, low-level assistant for a decade, high-level assistant for the better part of a decade, and then he finally gets this job as the head coach. And I also think you'd be lying if Ted Leonsis, or you didn't think Ted Leonsis had a joy in hiring someone with that name. But if Wes Unseld Jr. didn't get hired here, he would have gotten hired somewhere else in the last couple of years. I don't think he's on the staff when the Nuggets win the championship because he would have gotten poached to be a head coach somewhere. He was interviewing for, when Michael Winger took this job here, he talked about how Wes Unseld Jr. was one of the candidates they had interviewed for the Clippers. When they hired Ty Lue, he was high on their list. And they wound up going with Ty Lue, which is probably the better option. But Wes Unseld Jr. was a truly viable candidate, and he's a great dude. Today is the way that I will headline this, if you will, is today is a sad but necessary day. It is not a happy day. It's a day that needed to happen, but it's sad but necessary. And now we'll see what Brian Keefe can do. And maybe he's the right guy. Maybe you wait till the offseason you're definitely going to see this offseason, but you very well could get to this offseason and go in a completely different direction. So I do think it's cool the last couple of years. There are more NBA coaches that I'm just wait, that dude's a head coach right now? If we played a game, Haney had to step out early to deal with something, but our guy Ryan Clary, shout out to RC coming over from the 106.7 The Fan side and pinch hitting here. Appreciate you, Ryan, first of all.
Thank you.
If we did NBA head coach real or fake game, how well did you think you would do?
I don't think I'd do all too great, Craig. I'm not gonna lie. I just have a feeling I want to do too good.
Yeah, it's not a bunch of former players that you'd heard of and guys that have been around and for years. We talk about all these retreads in the NFL. The NBA is the worst retread league in the world.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same. I guess it's funny because international soccer dudes bounce from Italy to France to Spain to England back to Italy, and they're at all the same top clubs. There's guys that have coached the top clubs in every single country, and they just bounce around and get fired every 2 years. And you're like, how did everyone keep hiring the same guy? And that was the NBA forever. It felt like, I don't want to name names. That feels mean, but there's guys that would get 4 jobs, and you're like. But I will name a name because he's one of the best ever in terms of total wins. Lenny Wilkins, I don't know if he ever made an NBA Finals. He might have made one, but that dude coached and he won 1,000 games. He was at one point and might still be the NBA's all-time winningest coach in terms of sheer number of wins. But he coached for 7 teams, and you're like, what? Why? And now you have all these young assistants that are really innovative and really good. And, I think Nick Nurse was one of the big guys who got that started where it's who the hell's Nick Nurse? I don't care. He coaches basketball really well. And he replaced Dwayne Casey in Toronto, and they were awesome. And so I do think that there is that kind of name, but Brian Keefe, who's the interim now in Washington, also fits that. That would be a fun game. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow. I'll see how many NBA coaches I can name. I don't think I'd do as well as I'd like to. Not been as heavy of a league. My league pass watching lots of NBA basketball kind of starts now. We're at the end of football season. I can breathe again. So we got that. All right. Last but not least, whether I'm here, Anthony's here, Clary's here, someone else is doing the show, the one thing you can rely on pretty much daily is that we'll close it out with real things, real people said into real microphones. And that the computer is going to be delayed.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
Clary, for those watching on YouTube, we could see you smiling. You heard that imager before.
I have not live. I haven't done it live. I have learned it on the Odyssey app and as well as listening back to the Hoffman show, but I've not heard it live.
Apparently it's a party now because Darius just walked into your studios. Darius, have you heard the Real Things imager with all the funny quotes from Washington history? No? Okay, tell you what I'm going to do. Clary, make sure your mic is off. And I'm going to replay this because I want Darius's reaction to this. This is the favorite thing that we do on the show every day.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
Y'all, what y'all got in Grant Danny Land to match that? Yeah!
That is a great production. That is an amazing production. Double thumbs up from the crew behind 106.7 The Fan scenes back there.
That's what we're talking about.
We love it.
That is a Craig Hoffman, Vic Ferreira production. Thank you. That is what we need. Now, Ryan, my question for you is, where the hell did you save the thing that we're actually going to play?
Well, I have it already pulled up here.
Oh, you have it on your side of things.
So, yes, we can get that played up here.
Okay, so KJ Henry, he's a defensive end for the Commanders, as you'll remember. He was mic'd up in the season finale and had a little funny exchange with Fedarian Mathis while they were waiting for play to resume during a timeout.
Because I want it all. Decided I would have kept and I like this. It was only yeah. Hold on. I went to a white school, boy. You crazy. This the one right here. Yeah.
KJ Henry knows the Killers. What you know about that? Now, I will say, Ryan, I'm happy that you were able to come and relieve Anthony of his duties.
Mm-hmm.
But this would have been better with Anthony, who is a young black man who went to Georgetown Prep, sitting in that chair. That clip is kind of meant for Anthony to react to, not you.
Me. I mean, I'm not a big Killers guy, to be honest. I probably couldn't even tell you the band.
The Killers is the band.
Oh, that's great. There we go.
This actually worked out better than I imagined.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm just not the Killers guy. Is that the band, the Killers?
The Killers. The song is Mr. Brightside. It is literally one of the most iconic rock songs. Like, if you know 5 rock songs of the last 25 years, when did that song come out? Now I can't believe that I had to go 25 to be safe. How long ago did Mr. Brightside come out?
You're asking the wrong guy right now.
That is very apparent. 20 years ago, it was released. 2004. Tell you what, I'm gonna play this song.
There's one simple vision.
We're gonna have an ad on YouTube. That's what's gonna happen.
That's a good point.
We're gonna kill the ad and then I got him. You've heard this song.
Yeah. Actually, know it. You know what? They play this at Capitals games. I do know this song.
They play this song everywhere. It's literally one of the most popular songs. I'm going to now pull that down so we don't get a copyright violation. Literally one of the most popular songs of the last 20 years.
I don't know what to tell you, Craig.
KJ Henry knows it.
KJ Henry knows it. I don't know it. I'm not good with music.
What music do you know? Now I'm intrigued.
Modern rap, Kodak Black, guys like that who are, I'm Gen Z. I'm 24 years old, Craig, and I just turned 24, so I'm still young.
Yeah, you are. You are. Actually, you and KJ Henry are probably. Is KJ Henry older than you?
He might be.
He was like an
maybe.
older player coming out. KJ Henry. Doing a lot of Googling in this segment. He is 24. Okay. When is your birthday?
My birthday is November 30th, 1999.
November 30th of 99? Damn. You are older than KJ Henry. It's January of 99. That's how we're closing our show today. We'll see you tomorrow on The Hoffman Show.